Hello and welcome to our webinar on the impacts of Intel and energy and water panel discussion with guest panelists from around the region. This is our last event of our Impacts of Intel Summer Series. My name is Jerica Logan and I'm the Outreach Coordinator at the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis, otherwise known as CURA, and I will be your host for this event. If you require closed captioning, you will find a box at the bottom of the screen called CC. Click this box and select Show Subtitles. This will allow you to see the subtitles during the presentation. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have during the webinar in the Q&A box. We will ask as many of your questions as we can in the last portion of the presentation. And if we do not get to your question, we do apologize. If you have any additional questions following the event, feel free to email me at logan.433@osu.edu. This event is approved for one AICP CM credit. To claim your CM credit, log into your My APA account on the APA website and enter in the event in your online CM event log. There will also be a brief survey at the end of the webinar. If you have time, please provide your feedback. I am now going to pass it over to our director, Harvey Miller.
Thank you, Jerica, and welcome to the finale, one might say, in our summer series on the impact of Intel on Ohio. We've saved probably the biggest impact for last, energy and water, and we have a great panel today who I will introduce, who will talk about some of the implications we have for energy and water in Ohio with the new Intel development and how we are going to handle these impacts and make sure things are shaped towards positive outcomes all around. I want to take a moment or two before I introduce the panel to talk about our fall 2022 series here at CURA. We're doing a series called Tech in the City, and it's about technology and how it's profoundly impacted cities, how it's made them more dynamic and active than ever before. I think we all recognize this, but we want to explore this fall. Can we use these new urban data technologies to rise to the challenge of an urban planet? So we're inviting planners, storytellers, and urban scholars to share how they see technology changing cities and how we can use technologies to guide better outcomes. So we'll have 3 events this fall. On September 23rd, we'll have Rob Kitchen, who's a professor of geography at Maynooth University and a very well-known scholar in this area. And he has a large European Research Council funded project on storytelling with urban data. And we're going to hear about that on September 23rd. On November 18th, we have Elizabeth Delmel from University of Pennsylvania, and she'll be giving a talk on text as spatial data in urban analytics. And then finally, on December 2nd, we're having a panel on evolving community engagement. Recently, in 2021, 5 senior members of 3 major private sector planning firms, Connect the Dots Insight, Sam Schwartz, and Nelson Nygaard, those are the 3 firms, they co-authored a manifesto that was published in Planetizen. It was called "It's Time for Public Participation to Evolve with Transportation Planning." So they threw down a gauntlet for community engagement in planning, and we're going to have a panel discussion with them, with all 5 authors on December 2nd. We'll hear the challenge they're raising for involving community engagement planning and our ideas for paths forward to kind of learn from what happened in COVID and how we're now engaging on things like Zoom, but how to use that to to increase community engagement in the planning process, which is something we all know is a very desirable outcome and something we've been trying to struggle with for years. So this is another great series put together by CURA's outreach coordinator, Jerica Logan, who you just met, and you'll see again at the end. You don't want to miss any of these events or any of the exciting things that are happening at your friendly neighborhood CURA. So sign up for our monthly newsletter at cura.osu.edu and also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. So now I'll turn to our another terrific panel we have here for this discussion. I'll first introduce Linda Weavers. She holds the John C. Geipel Endowed Chair and is professor in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering at The Ohio State University. Dr. Weavers is co-director of the Ohio Water Resources Center. This is a federally authorized and state-designated water resources research institute for the state of Ohio. And she's also co-lead of the Sustainability Institute's Healthy Air, Land, and Water Research Program. Dr. Weaver's research is multi-pronged with expertise in developing water and hazardous waste treatment technologies, promoting innovation in the water industry, and determining the fate of emerging contaminants in water systems. And she's a fellow and past president of the Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors. We also have Jeff Belecki. Jeff Belecki is an associate professor at The Ohio State University with joint appointments in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering and the John Glenn College of Public Affairs. He is also on the faculty of the Environmental Science Graduate Program and has a courtesy appointment in the City Regional Planning section of the Knowlton School of Architecture. Dr. Belecki serves Ohio State Sustainability Institute as well as a research program lead for the Sustainable Energy Research Program. And he sets strategic priorities for research and cultivates the university energy research community in this role. He is running the Energy Sustainability Research Laboratory at Ohio State, and his scholarship focuses on issues where energy and environmental systems and policy interact, primarily on topics related to carbon management, renewable energy, and the energy-water nexus. We also have Aaron Wilson, who is an atmospheric scientist at The Ohio State University, where he holds a joint appointment as a research scientist at the Byrd Polar and Climate Research Center and a climate specialist with OSU Extension. He works with the State Climate Office of Ohio as a liaison to the USDA Midwest Climate Hub and is lead author on the Midwest chapter of the 5th National Climate Assessment. And last and certainly not least is Stephanie Cromer. She's Director of Energy and Environmental Policy at the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. She previously served as Director of External Relations at the Ohio Chamber for 3 years before taking on this new role in 2019. Prior to her employment at the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, Stephanie began her career as a project manager at King Strategic Communications, where she worked on congressional and Ohio races. After the 2014 general election cycle, she worked for the House of Representatives in Ohio and the clerk for the Financial Subcommittee on Agriculture, Development, and Natural Resources. And in 2014, Stephanie also received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Ashland University and graduated as an Ashbrook Scholar. Congratulations on that, Stephanie. So now what we'll do is I'll turn this over to the panel, and each of them will have an opening statement of just a few minutes, and we'll go in the same order that I just introduced people. So Linda, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Harv. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this panel today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I thought first I'd just start out and just give you a little bit of an overview about what the Ohio Water Resources Center is. So thank you for introducing it at the beginning. I'll just go into a little bit more detail. So we're one of 54 water resources research institutes that exist throughout the United States. So all the states and territories. We were established under the Water Resources Research Act, which first came out in 1964, and we're funded through the USGS. So what we are and why we were set up is that we're federal state partnerships. And so we plan and facilitate and conduct research that helps to solve state and regional water problems. So we promote technology transfer between universities and users, promote dissemination and application of the research. We train scientists primarily through the participation in research, graduate students on research projects, you can think of that. And we award competitive grants under the Water Resources Research Act. So the Ohio Water Resources Center, we currently have about 7 active funded projects that we have annually that we have running through our shop. And we don't just fund them at the Ohio State University, but throughout all the universities in the state of Ohio. We have a competitive RFP program that we put out every year, and we're currently in the process, and we have our RFP for pre-proposals out right now, which is due in September. So in the last 5 years, we've funded 13 different universities with our RFP program. Some active research that has been pretty prominent recently is that we partnered with Ohio EPA, Ohio Department of Health, US EPA, and other universities in the state of Ohio to create and run a wastewater monitoring network to monitor for the prevalence of COVID at a community level. So this obviously started in 2020. We coordinated that effort through the Ohio Water Resources Center to monitor 70 communities and 13 universities that have been measuring their wastewater twice weekly since the summer of 2020, and that covers 49% of the population of the state of Ohio. That effort was recently transferred to the Ohio Department of Health. Is going to keep working on that and through funding through the CDC to continue just with COVID, as well as other diseases that can be monitored through wastewater. So now I'll switch over and I'll talk a little bit about kind of why I'm here is thinking about Intel and Intel coming to Central Ohio. What's it going to mean? So obviously my expertise is on the water side. So I thought first I'd just give you a little bit of things to think about in terms of water and the state of water right now in Central Ohio. So the city of Columbus has 3 drinking water plants. 2 of them are surface water plants that combined they have the ability to provide 255 million gallons per day of water to 1.2 million people in Central Ohio. So not just in the city of Columbus, but a lot of the surrounding communities as well. So in order to do that, they have 5 reservoirs to store water, to store that surface water. And so that helps to buffer droughts and to kind of manage the water throughout the year that's needed and used at different periods of time. So the city is also in the early stages. They recently had an RFP out for beginning work on a 4th water plant in the city of Columbus. And that was in the planning, and that they do master plans and they think out like what are our water needs going to be. And so that was in the thinking before Intel kind of came into the picture. And so that 4th water plant is, just because Columbus and Central Ohio is growing. So the size is expected to be on the order of 35 million gallons per day, and expected to be operational around 2031. So that's kind of the picture of what we have here in Central Ohio right now. So Intel, most of their fabrications in the United States are in the Phoenix area. So they're in Arizona. You think about Arizona, water is not so plentiful in Arizona, but water needs for chip manufacturing are quite high. So Intel, because of their strong presence in the Arizona, they have initiatives to reduce water use and reuse water in-house whenever it's possible. But it's still estimated that semiconductors use 2 to 4 million gallons per day, depending on the size of their fabs. So that's very high kind of water needs. And the water that they use is to clean the chips. And so they need to have very high quality water to do that, to prevent the impurities from damaging these chips. And so after they use the water, because of this cleaning process and other chemicals that I imagine that they probably use in that process, they have to treat it either in-house somehow or discharge it. So my suspicion is that they'll probably be discharging to the city of Columbus. So that's generally what happens with industrial manufacturers. They don't treat it and discharge it directly into rivers and streams. They're in a surrounding community. They use that community wastewater plant in order to do that. So, but one of the issues might be the higher salts. If they need very high quality water, generally what they would use would be something like a reverse osmosis, which is removing salts as well. And we have fairly high alkalinity and high hardness, which will result in higher salt levels in the systems. If they're cleaning the water, they'll end up with brines. And so, what they do, and their facilities in Arizona even have a brine reduction facility as part of their kind of wastewater reuse that they're doing. So that would be something that I would imagine that people are thinking about is what do you do with that brine that gets discharged back into streams? Then you might end up with resulting in higher salinity in these streams that we need to manage, because that can impact the ecosystem and the quality of the water. And they were issued a permit for basically a wetland offset. So they're going to be impacting wetland in that area. And so they'll be putting in a new wetland. Whenever you do that, you're never going to have exactly the same quality. Nature just does a good job in knowing where to put things and the best ways to do it. We can't mimic that very well. So overall, Columbus, plans for its water needs. Chip manufacturing uses a lot of water, but they have the capacity. They've been planning for things like this for a long time. And so I expect it'll be reasonably manageable for the city of Columbus to have this chip manufacture. Wastewater treatment might be an issue that they need to think through in terms of whatever the components will be in that wastewater, and managing that and understanding what that is. With that, I will turn it over to the next person.
Would be, thank you. And that would be Jeff. Jeff, tell us about the energy implications.
Yeah, thanks, Harvey and Garrica, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and to help put a little more of the Ohio context around energy on the Intel plant. You know, chip manufacturing requires a heck of a lot of energy, just like it requires a heck of a lot of water. And Ohio has a long history of energy production. It's primarily in fossil fuels, and with the hydraulic fracturing primarily in the eastern part of the state. We've been producing a lot of natural gas more recently. Further, longer ago, much more coal production. And we have this legacy of a focus on fossil energy, which has influenced our renewable energy, our wind and solar electricity generation capacity, which I'll return to in a little bit. And I know that Stephanie can speak to some of these influences as well. One of the things I want to emphasize in my opening comments is the CHIPS Act, which provided an enormous amount of incentives for Intel to build this plant. The CHIPS Act is not just about semiconductor chips. It also has provisions in it that can help to address some of the environmental consequences, CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, and other aspects of the large energy requirements. And in this context, you know, Intel has committed to use only renewable energy for its plants. Another plant that it has in one quarter consumed about 45,000 average households worth of electricity in one quarter. It's an enormous amount of energy just in one quarter, and this plant is larger. With the CHIPS Act, again, it provides the incentives to investigate and deploy technologies that actually remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, with the commitment towards using renewable energy, which Intel is primarily doing through renewable energy credits, which are instruments that allow you to claim that your electricity came from renewable sources. And there's I can follow up on how that works and how that relates to how the electricity actually flows within the grid. The need for this context to consider Intel's investment is large, and the context extends beyond its own operations and its own ability to claim these renewable energy credits and its sourcing electricity from renewable energy, but also the other emissions that are engendered in other parts of the system upon which this large energy demand will be placed. So if you think without the Intel plant, we'll have this much electricity being demanded. With the Intel plant, we have this much electricity demanded. That marginal increase in where that comes from and how that is actually generated is extremely important. I'll also just sort of emphasize that there's a large focus on emissions from the operations of the plant, but there are supply chain effects, and semiconductors require a lot of processing, a lot of minerals and materials that also have to be excavated and transported and so on. And so there are emissions and other environmental and social contexts that need to be considered when we think about a sustainable operation above and beyond the economic considerations. I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to bring up more of these topics in more detail in a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Aaron, I really think we should have this conversation unless we recognize the climate crisis and the interactions between what's happening here and the climate. So can you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Harvey and Garrick, for inviting me here today. As Harvey mentioned in the introductions, I sort of wear a lot of hats around Ohio State, and more recently as both a research scientist at Bird Polar and also with the OSU Extension, primarily in the Ag and Natural Resources Group. And surprisingly, maybe to some, this aligns really well with the mission of the State Climate Office, which is, providing climate services, communication, education, and outreach, and research to the citizens of Ohio. So it's really a great opportunity to talk about this topic. On the surface, you might ask, well, what do polar regions have anything to do with agriculture or even Central Ohio and in these decisions? But, when you stop to think about it, maybe it's not really surprising. All these regions are connected. So we're all connected, and what's happening in these often distant thought locations like Greenland and Antarctica have very real impacts here in Central Ohio, and then ultimately, impact decisions like building an Intel chip factory here. So, basically, I spend a lot of time talking with the agricultural community and other communities throughout the state on climate change impacts and asking questions about building resilience or energy or thinking about these topics that we're talking about in reference to Intel today. So when you get down to it, this is a very personal question, right? It's a very geographically specific question because even though you get similar trends, maybe, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, across the Midwest, the challenges that they pose in those specific locations and the solutions to those challenges are intimately connected to people and place, right? So when we look at the climate that's happening right here, the changes that we're seeing, we are getting warmer in Ohio. The top 9 out of 10 warmest years going back to 1895 have all occurred since 1990. We know Ohio is getting wetter. The top 8 of the top 10 wettest years have occurred since 1990. And as Linda mentioned, Intel needing a lot of water. Maybe that sounds good, right? That's a good thing that we're seeing more water, but it's a little bit more complicated than that because we know both temperature and precipitation, the evidence demonstrates that the variability is changing. A larger portion of our annual precipitation is falling in intense events, falling more during the fall, winter, and spring. And we're also seeing these rapid transitions between dry periods and wet periods, and they're occurring more rapidly over the Midwest as well. And so even though we're seeing increased rainfall in spring and winter, we have regionally negative trends in our summer precip. And so within a single year, we're seeing oscillations between these extreme wet periods and extreme dry periods. We see a lot of compounding events too. You think about when COVID started and thinking about urban heat and then combining those where you got a lot of people in the cooling centers during a pandemic, that can be an issue. Or recently when we had the derecho combined, followed by intense heat and all the power outages. And so this all needs to be considered when I think, Intel's making the decision, right, to come to Central Ohio. So, working with companies, working with the city, working with other municipalities across the state, there's a lot of questions that we face, but obviously how do we minimize the impact of new development, and how do we limit that development's exacerbation of these issues? So a lot of that is obviously centered around energy efficiency. Thinking about a lot, working with a private company here in Ohio about, their location and minimizing flood potential, assessing, assets and moving them around a particular campus to the least flood prone region. I think water efficiency is big, with these oscillations. Even in the ag community, we're facing these decisions about how can you store more water during these rainier springs to have available during the drier summers. But with the water efficiency related to Intel, I think that that's an important question. Limiting cooling demands, obviously, on your buildings and vegetation and all those considerations. And then I know the last segment of this series focused on transportation, but what's the transportation impact and what happens to the environment with these employees that are, going back and forth to the facility as well. And, we know where we have more built environments, we have opportunities to increase temperature. So thinking about those, limiting the cooling demand or how buildings are structured goes a long way. So I think that's a good overview of the climate impacts, and then some of the decisions that I think, certainly Intel has thought about as they pick Central Ohio as a place to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. And Stephanie, tell us what the thinking is at the Ohio Chamber of Commerce and what actions you're taking.
Yes, thanks, Harvey, for having me. I've really enjoyed hearing everybody's perspective. Everyone is really an expert in their field, and I really appreciate being a part of this. So I'll give a little bit of background on what is the Ohio Chamber, who we are. The Ohio Chamber is the state's leading business advocate and resource, and we aggressively champion free enterprise, economic competitiveness, and the growth for the benefit of all Ohioans. Our members range from anyone from a small, mom and pop coffee shop diner to international companies. So in my role as Director of Energy and Environment Policy at the Chamber, I lead our efforts to advance the organization's public policy agenda in the areas of energy and environment, specifically by advocating for policies that protect the environment without harming the competitiveness of Ohio's businesses, and policies that ensure access to reliable and affordable energy. The Ohio Chamber is a member-driven organization, and our members are very diverse, and probably nowhere is that more evident than in the energy space. We represent companies that extract raw materials used in generating power, that actually generate power, be it nuclear, natural gas, wind, solar, coal. So we kind of, we represent the whole gamut. We also have members who transmit and distribute power, that sell power, consume large amounts of power, and that manufacture products or provide services somewhere along that power supply chain. More often, their individual corporate interests do align, but occasionally they do not. So it's hard to get to consensus on specific energy policies. But I would say all of our members really do agree that no energy source in Ohio should be subjected to any kind of new barriers to entry. And we believe that all energy sources can contribute to that well-balanced, diverse energy portfolio. So like many associations, the Ohio Chamber is working very hard to get Intel into our membership. So no, they are not officially a member of ours, but we do believe with the passing of the CHIPS Act, and once they receive all their building permits and start to break ground, they'll probably start joining other industry associations such as ours and other local chambers of commerce. So we're very excited that Intel's coming, and we believe this investment will bring thousands of direct and indirect jobs to our state, not to mention serve as a focal point for attracting businesses up and down the supply chain. And as you know, microchips are needed in everything from cars to smartphones. And during the COVID pandemic, manufacturers could not get these chips to produce their products. So that caused a lot of factory shutdowns, delays, and increased costs for consumers. So I believe the United States currently only produces about 12% of the world's semiconductors, and that number is down about 37% since 1990. So as we've seen through the pandemic, the global supply lines are easily disrupted, and these semiconductor shortages can have potentially serious effects on our economy. So we believe Ohio and its rich history of being a leader in manufacturing is perfectly situated. And, we do have many fresh water sources, as well as, we are a member of the PJM interconnection, which does provide for a little bit more reliability than other states. So, with that, the proximity to fresh water and that reliable electric grid, we do believe that our state is a perfect location for a company like Intel, but we do recognize that there are a lot of factors that we will have to consider while they're in construction. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I kind of want to raise that question because it seems to me to be very fundamental, and maybe there's an obvious answer, but we know that computer chips have to be made somewhere, And we know that they're essential infrastructure for our world. I mean, we're talking to each other through computer chips right now. From an energy and water perspective, putting aside economic development and things like that, is Ohio really a good place to make these things? Who'd like to jump in?
I think you're tapping both Linda and I at the same time, and we're both waiting for the other to jump in. So I'll jump in. Yeah, so, as I mentioned, Ohio has a long history of energy production. And we would like for this electricity that the Intel plant to use, that will be used in the Intel plant, to be as benign as possible. And by benign, I'm not just referring to environmental emissions, air pollution and carbon dioxide, but I'm also referring to the social context of the production of that electricity. Is Ohio a good place from an energy perspective? Yeah, why not? We have the potential to be able to substantially improve the amount of renewably generated electricity on our grid. We have a number of rules that make that difficult and actually put us behind our neighbors. We have setback rules for siting wind turbines. We have more local control of solar PV siting than other neighboring states have, both of which in terms of the deployment of wind and solar generation capacity, put us at a disadvantage. You'll often hear people cite a statistic that Ohio generates about, or uses about 3% of its electricity is from renewable sources, wind and solar. That's sort of hard to put in context. It can be a number that's interpreted a little bit erroneously. We do have about 3% of our electricity generation is from wind and solar, but we also import, as Stephanie said, we are part of the PJM market, which is a multi-state market. The electricity that's generated in Ohio does not just stay in Ohio; it goes elsewhere. Electricity that's generated in Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Michigan, and so on, also gets transmitted into us. You can't necessarily tell where the electron that was generated came from and what type of facility it came from. And because if you think about a whole network of tubes of water, you can't track exactly where a particular water molecule will go in any predictive way. And it's the same with electricity. And so the energy perspective is that, given that our neighbors, Michigan, Indiana, they have net outflows of electricity. So and they actually generate higher amounts of their electricity generation in their states are from renewable sources. That 3% for Ohio needs to be sort of tempered with what happens in the neighbors. And one of the things I mentioned earlier was that you also have to think about the marginal demand for electricity that this plant requires. So we have, this much demand right now. All of a sudden, the plant's built. We have this much demand. That where that marginal amount comes from is what's important. And while these renewable energy credits that Intel is using to be able to claim that its electricity is coming from wind and solar, there are markets for these renewable energy credits. That does not necessarily lead to more. The evidence is pretty underwhelming that it leads to more deployment of wind and solar capacity. So we can do better. It's in Ohio in terms of the benign nature of our electricity generation. that requires much more than just technology development. It requires policy changes. We've been able to attract intel. We could perhaps be able to affect policy as well. I'll leave it there and let Linda talk about, is Ohio water useful?
But before we jump in the water, I wanted to kind of follow up on that and ask Stephanie about what's going on in order to help facilitate this transition towards more renewable sources for that margin that Jeff is talking about.
Agreed. This ongoing transition to a cleaner, more diverse energy portfolio does, I think, represent a significant economic development opportunity for our state. And we have multiple members across various industries, from banking to, manufacturing, to even traditional oil and gas energy producers, demanding more renewable development. Intel, they buy RECs, but we have many companies who will only come to Ohio if they can get their renewable energy from renewable energy developed in Ohio. That's really popular in the tech industry. So Senate Bill 52 was kind of, so backing up, actually, in 2014, I believe it was in a budget amendment, there was a successful attempt actually to put some wind setbacks into law. And these are some of the most strictest wind setbacks in the country. So
can you define what you mean by setback for the audience?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
setback is where a turbine can be from the adjacent property line.
Okay.
So I don't exactly know the numbers for sure, but I believe we increased those setbacks by over two and a half times of what they were prior to the newest wind setback, which now
It's bad, isn't it? It restricts energy, renewable energy
Yes, and
development,
the
right?
setbacks are definitely the most egregious setbacks in the country. So now, not only are we have not seen any new wind development since then. We had projects that were already in the queue and grandfathered in at that point. But we've not seen any applications really for new wind development in the state. So now, fast forward to 2021. With Senate Bill 52, not only was wind an issue, but solar became an issue for a lot of landowners and folks in our state. So Senate Bill 52 originally would have allowed township trustees to put referenda on ballots for wind and solar projects. So basically an election kind of popularity contest on whether a wind or solar project should be developed. And this was very far in the process for these developers. And so that was obviously very problematic for us as the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. We want to see more economic development, and that includes renewable development. So we were very ingrained in that process. We knew that Senate Bill 52 had the votes to get done as it was. So we were able to, with the wind and solar communities, kind of finagle a compromise. And this compromise entails allowing wind and solar developers to go to county commissioners instead of township trustees with their project plans, and just kind of getting a yes or no, is this something that would fit your community? So kind of bringing that local level a little further up. Was it a perfect compromise? No. We're kind of seeing that realistic impact now that the Ohio Power Siting Board has released their 5-year draft rule reviews. We're now seeing solar setbacks in those rules, as well as certain kind of fencing and other really potentially problematic things that will affect solar development as well.
Okay.
Can I just add a little bit more context to the renewable energy credits? And so part of what I was and Stephanie alluded to this a little bit with her comments. Part of what I was saying about the marginal increase in electricity generation is, say we're generating this much electricity right now, and this much of it is coming from wind and solar. The bottom portion is coming from natural gas. The renewable energy credits or certificates, depending on the terminology, allow entities to claim that their electricity is coming from this portion. The portion down here that's being generated from natural gas still goes somewhere. It doesn't automatically disappear. And so even though an entity, purchases or gets the right to claim the wind and solar generate electricity, the natural gas or whatever else generate electricity is still being generated and still being consumed somewhere. And so that's part of the broader context that, yeah, while some might be able to claim it's 100% renewable or whatever, it's sort of creating this condition where the other demands for electricity are getting a higher amount of fossil generated electricity, as an example.
That's a very interesting nuance. Linda, let's turn to water now. We have water here, and it seems like it's better to make chips here in Ohio than it is in Phoenix, where there's little water. Is that it, or is the story more complex?
Well, everything is obviously complex, right? It's got to be an optimization of kind of all the resources that are needed. And in Arizona, you've got a lot of sunshine, right? And so maybe you have a little bit more favorable conditions in terms of policy for solar, right? For the energy needs for those sorts of things. And so it's got to be that balance. That's not quite the same here in Ohio. But in terms of the water, there is the water. Yes, it's changing with climate change. It's changing in many places with climate change. Columbus has done a pretty good job in planning and building reservoirs, and they have reservoirs all the way up in Union County to kind of collect the water. We don't have really wide, big, vast rivers bringing water to Ohio, to Central Ohio. So they have to manage with reservoirs, and they do that reasonably well. You think, okay, if not Ohio, where, right? Arizona's got a lot of issues with having enough water, and it's been all over the news. They get water in the Phoenix area from the Colorado River. And the Colorado River is what feeds Lake Mead and the Hoover Reservoir. And we keep hearing about how many hundreds of feet down it is from its higher levels. And so that's going to continue to be an issue. They are also building fabs there as well as here in Columbus. So they're kind of going forward on a couple of fronts and trying to get more to manufacturing. If it's not here, okay, maybe Kansas. Kansas, they get their water dominantly in Kansas and a lot of that region of the Midwest from very deep ancient aquifers. And that the levels of those aquifers, they thought they were so huge, we're never going to deplete them. They are going down. And so that is essentially non-renewable water. In Central Ohio, where our water is coming from streams, what happens is we take it out to use it in Central Ohio, and we discharge it on kind of the southern end, and it heads down to the Ohio River, and it ends up going eventually to the Gulf of Mexico. So you can say we're kind of using it and putting most of it back in the system. And so it's not really being wasted, right? But we're just kind of changing the quality of the water as it kind of goes through our city. So in that sense, using a surface water is probably a much better prospect than using groundwater, especially groundwaters that are not renewable. In Arizona, they are able to replenish the groundwater. And what they do is some of that water that they use is then recharges their aquifer and eventually gets reused through their system. So, you kind of have to think about the whole picture and how the management happens. One thing that, I'm not sure what's been thought about or what's been done, but you look at kind of these aerial images about what this facility is going to look like. It looks like there's a whole bunch of parking. Right, and that's all hardscape. And so when it rains, we get these flashy rains that we've heard, these horrendous storms that have happened in St. Louis, have happened in Kentucky, 9 inches in, a few hours, then all of that washes off. And all of that washes off if they haven't planned for how to slow that down from all this hardscape that's going to happen. That could impact those areas, those small streams in the Licking County area. How do they manage for that? And especially that's an impact of climate change that could become more severe. So I have no idea what these images and how much they're really related to reality, but it'd be really nice if they would plan for that stormwater management.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add that part of the planning for that stormwater management could be to have angled photovoltaics that provide shade for the cars that are parked underneath them, and then you could conceivably channel the runoff and collect that water from the photovoltaics as well. So parking lots, you know, while their runoff potential is a water concern, their ability to put solar photovoltaics on them is an electricity generation opportunity.
Okay, and before I turn it over to the audience, which Jericho will field some of the questions, I want to ask Aaron to kind of wrap this all up in terms of bring this together in terms of climate impacts. So what can be done to limit the climate impacts of this facility and also mitigate the risks of the climate crisis on the facility itself? I know it's a big question, but.
Yeah, so, you know, obviously, you know, I think we're focused a lot on water, right? We're, as we've been talking about in the energy production as well, but with, you know, I mentioned it before, you know, other companies look at this as a climate risk, right? When we're talking about, Linda, I think made it a great point about look at other possible, you know, areas. Why Ohio? Well, you know, other areas are, you know, stretched differently because of the changes that we're seeing, right? Out west, we're wildfires. We don't have massive wildfires in Ohio yet, right? We have this replenishable water system, very water rich area. And so, you know, thinking about that and thinking about the likelihood, the projections showing us we're going to see more rainfall, another 10-15% annually as we head into the mid 21st century. So minimizing that flood potential, I think, of the facility and being able to manage that water is going to be critical here. That I don't think, you know, we think of climate change as a threat multiplier. It makes what we do harder to do. So the planning isn't going to get easier as we head through the next few years. So when you're planning now, this is the right time to be planning for those things, how to deal with more water versus waiting until we have some 1 in 1,000 year event that are occurring more frequently. Eastern Kentucky, St. Louis, and now Illinois, 3 in the Midwest in a single month. This, you know, our statistic is one more point to make. Our statistical analysis, what we rely on to look at flooding, is really hampered by the lack of ingesting projected data into it. It relies on long-term historical records, and what we're seeing though is a change in that variability. And so one thing that we also have to do and think about is improving that data that we're utilizing to build facilities in new development in municipalities across the state.
Okay, thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Jerica Logan. We have some good questions from the audience. Please, Jerica.
So I'll first start. We have a question about a new wetland. So they're asking, does this new wetland have connectivity to the existing wetland hydrology, or is it disconnected?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of a question for me. I made reference to that they recently got a permit from Ohio EPA that they're going to impact 10 acres of wetlands, and they're planning to build 20 new acres. And so those wetlands that are being impacted are considered to be isolated wetlands. So they're not hydraulically connected to other components in the watershed. It doesn't, the permit that I found online doesn't say anything about what these new wetlands will look like. So that's the state of what I know. But, you know, if you look and people that study wetlands and kind of making new wetlands and built wetlands compared to what is existing, I mean, we can't do as well as nature does. Partly, you know, the constraints and maybe the land that was acquired, you know, the land that was acquired, it's, you know, maybe not a natural kind of condition to have a good wetland there in the first place. And so these are things that, you know, whenever you take something away from nature, you're not putting back as good as what was there to start with.
Thank you. And so for the next one, we have somebody who looks like they're being impacted by this Intel facility in their own yard. So what are some ways that Intel can mitigate harm to neighboring businesses and also homeowners?
I'm not quite sure how I'll answer this, but I'm sure there has been some good neighbor agreements and things signed. I'm not sure what all the proprietary businesses of Intel, but a lot of times that's something that's pretty common with these companies coming into rural areas. That's probably all I can say on that. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that.
I'll just
Yeah,
add that. Oh,
Go ahead, Jeff.
all right. I'll just add that, it's part of the reason why I've been emphasizing that sustainability isn't just about environmental conditions, it's about economic and social conditions as well. And that happens throughout supply chains, and that happens with the siting of facilities too. And we've got a whole host of energy equity and industrial equity issues that are long-standing problems, not just here in Ohio and elsewhere. And I mean, I think that better neighbors make better friends, or whatever that phrase is, or should be. Yeah, I mean, we need to pay attention to the social consequences of things as well.
Thank you. And then, Aaron, did you have anything, or do you want to?
No, we can move on. That's good.
Okay, perfect. So the next one is high water consumption and wastewater treatment are significant considerations for Intel development. But knowing that Ohio is getting wetter, what requirements and incentives can communities adopt to increase rainwater management best practices and best practices to reduce flooding and to protect watersheds downstream?
Yeah, that's really great question. So that's where I was saying all the hardscape that's being built and planning now to have ways to manage that, and especially as our rainfall changes with climate changes, is putting in some best management practices. And there's a whole host of best management practices for these hardscapes, so that'll have less impact. Because otherwise, if you get these flashes of a lot more water than a stream is used to, you get a lot of erosion, you'll increase the sediment loads, and you'll just be causing harm to those regions, which you don't want to do. And so that's where maybe that wetland they're building is going to be an offset, and the stormwater management can be a part of that. That would be great if that could happen. So that needs to be considered.
Thank you. And then our next question is, they're saying that they think that there is a install for a solar project planned for Monroe in Hartford Township, about 5 to 10 miles from Intel. Is that a good use of the land given the need for additional housing in the area? And what's the balance?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack at this and another one that's in there about reducing the energy imports that Ohio has. I mean, I don't want to make a judgment on what the best use of a particular parcel of land is, but I will say that we have a tendency to think that things are mutually exclusive, and there's a common perception, for example, that citing solar photovoltaic on agricultural land means that you cannot do agriculture anymore. So it's either PV or agriculture. There's actually approaches called agrivoltaics that allow you to do both. You manage the land so that you both have the PV and you can grow crops or graze cattle, graze sheep. They like the shade. The PV provides shade. There's mutually beneficial ways to do this. In the context of this particular question, I'd say that, if the housing that's being built had solar PV on the roofs, if it had ground source heat pumps to help power to help provide the energy demands for the house, there are ways that we can do housing development that also has more benign electricity, both generation and energy requirement demand with it. I also wanted to sort of address a way to the comment about not having interstate transfers of energy. We actually benefit from having a market that's broader and a system that's broader than just our state. A month or so ago, we had this, as Aaron mentioned, this derecho that took down a lot of transmission lines and unfortunately was at a time when we had a lot of electricity demand for air conditioning because it was darn hot. And And without being able to transmit electricity across state boundaries, we'd be in rougher shape. And that's part of the reason why having an interconnected grid is really important. You know, a year and a half ago, Texas got in trouble because, in essence, Texas is its own grid. And there was a series of really cold days that are not the resilience to which is not embedded in their infrastructure and in their training for their grid operators. And there was a lot of power outages there. If there was a better interconnect and a better ability to transmit electricity in, those power outages would be mitigated a bit. I'd also say the more opportunities you have to choose something, in this case, power plants or that are generating electricity, you can cherry pick the cheaper options, right? So one of the benefits of trade is that you have more options to, global integration. You have more options for where you can get your goods, which in essence tends to reduce the cost. There are other issues that might come out, but the ability to transmit and transfer goods, and in this case, electricity and energy, actually can be quite beneficial. It can help to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Thank you. And then for our next question, it asks, what do you make of the current threat by state treasurers, see West Virginia, to withdraw funding and incentives from companies that embrace renewables to offset the effects on climate change?
I guess that's for me to address too. I and maybe Aaron can also speak. I mean, I think that we all our individual values come from different places. Part of my value system is that I believe that I want to be able to spend more money. I'm willing and able to spend more money to have electricity generated from sources that are less or that are more benign than other sources. That's part of my value system. It's also, frankly, part of my I'm able to afford a little bit higher electricity. But as I'm saying that, we are at the point, I think that these issues often get conflated with impressions about the cost of energy from renewable sources. Over the last decade, electricity generated from wind and solar has decreased in cost to the point where it is competitive with coal and natural gas generated electricity. That was not always the case. We've had a remarkable decrease in cost. We've had innovative financing schemes. We've had innovative technologies. We've had innovative policy, that all of which has allowed the learning curve, the technological learning curve, to really come down, so that we don't necessarily have this the former reality where electricity from renewable sources is more costly. And I don't know what's underlying these threats. I actually wasn't aware of this threat, so I'm taking that at face value with the comment. But we do have to remember that, or accept that the reality is that we don't necessarily have a price premium for more benign electricity anymore.
I think if I can answer too, I mean, from the climate side and the climate imperative, and I always tell, when I'm out giving talks, it's like, well, I've lived a privileged life knowing, fossil fuels have really fueled our economy, but both our knowledge and, as Jeff pointed out, the economy's become a lot more competitive, where renewables are a lot more obtainable, right? And so when we think about from a climate perspective, and I know, we rely on data and we rely on science, which we can have a whole series on the trust in science. It clearly shows the connections between burning fossil fuels and negative climate outcomes outweighing the positive outcomes. And we know that the worst outcomes, far worse than what most of us talk about in our assessments. And as a matter of fact, there's been a recent push by the national academies that we need to look at the most catastrophic potential because it's out there and it's a possibility if we do not find other non-fossil fuel, sources for energy production. And so I think, as Jeff mentioned, it all aligns with values. I see it as a moral or ethical issue as well. And thinking about children, my children and what they're inheriting in the future as well. So the worst that, it's not like often we talk about tipping points, right? I don't like to frame it that way from a climate perspective. It's how can we, avoid even worse outcomes than what we're already projecting in the future. And certainly that speaks to renewables.
Yeah, and I'll also add that not addressing these issues is costly. So if a concern about cost is underlying these decisions, we're experiencing multi-million, multi-billion-dollar effects now, forest fires and so on, and primarily in the West. A derecho here that AEP and others had to invest time and money into getting the transmission lines back up and everything. We're experiencing the cost consequences of a warming climate and the variability that it's engendered now, and it's projected to get much worse.
Okay, I think it's 1 o'clock, so we'll have to wrap up now. I put a link to that PNAS article that Aaron just mentioned about exploring the consequences of extreme climate change. It's a bit sobering. I'm reading it myself right now, but it's definitely something worth looking at, something we do have to think about. So thanks to the panel once again. Great discussion. And everyone, just keep in touch, keep in tune keep tuned in with CURA. Fall events and other exciting things happening here at the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis at The Ohio State University. Enjoy your day, enjoy your weekend, and as always, take care, everyone.